please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV 18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan and we're coming to you from NASSCOM, our virtual studio that we've created here. Joining me today is the President of NASSCOM and the Chairman of NASSCOM, Rishad and Debjani. Thanks very much for joining us. We're here to talk about a new program or a new initiative that NASSCOM has launched. It's called Accelerate 10X. What's the point of this, Debjani? You know, NASSCOM has been nurturing the startup ecosystem for a few years now. Is the attempt now to go from scaling up, from starting up to scaling up, and what do you intend to do with this?
Well, I think you said it, right? So we launched NASSCOM 10K in 2013, around 5 years back, when there were roughly a handful of startups in India. And the goal at that point was, in 10 years, we will reach 10K startups, right? And we'll create India as a thriving startup ecosystem. 5 years down, we are the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. And it's a growing startup ecosystem. It's 7% growth. But there's something else happening, and that's the way technology is changing everything around us, right? The advances in technology is providing opportunities to the entire industry to innovate, to disrupt, and to find the kind of solutions to India's problems that we've never been able to find till now, right? But that requires a very high level of innovation, a very high level of capabilities, and that requires scale. And I think it's time to look at the startup ecosystem and see how do we take them to that next phase where they can drive the kind of disruptive innovation that is required for India that will also bring in the scale. So Accelerate 10X is an initiative under 10K that will focus on bringing together the entire ecosystem, right? From the accelerators to the VCs to the tech companies, to come together and work together to focus on 100 of the best deep tech startups in India. Invest in them, work with them for around 6 months to build the capabilities that will allow them to innovate at a global level and create the kind of solutions that's needed.
So that's the aspiration, Rishad, and I think that your target is what, to create about $15 billion companies by 2023. And since we're talking about deep tech, this is a focus area for the government as well. Is NASSCOM working with the government to put the AI policy in place, for instance? I mean, what do you need from the larger ecosystem from a policy perspective, or do you believe that you at NASSCOM, along with the venture capital as well as the tech companies, can pretty much chart the course out?
No, I think part of the magic of NASSCOM is that it works very closely with the government. So in fact, at the launch of Accelerate 10X that happened a few minutes before this, we had Anna Roy from Niti Aayog very much as a part of that conversation. So I think the magic is being able to bring all these different stakeholders together, as Debjani said, right? How do you bring government together? How do you bring corporates together? How do you bring venture together? How do you bring the skilling together? How do you bring these different capabilities together to ultimately create magic in building these companies? Because it cannot work in silos. And that's the credibility of NASSCOM and the magic of NASSCOM, that it's able to work across these different stakeholders, that it has the credibility to work across these different stakeholders. And I think that's very powerful.
So how aligned is this going to be to the government's AI vision, which basically focuses on languages, which focuses on precision agriculture, which focuses on healthcare? Are you also going to be nurturing companies that try and address those problems?
So I think the magic of deep tech, Shireen, is that it's able to solve big problems on scale, right? Whether it can be everything from healthcare and citizenry services, which the government would care about, to better customer service and cross-selling, upselling with your own private enterprise customers, right? And so there's a very clear overlap with what the government is trying to accomplish as well. And so it works very, very much hand in glove, I think.
Okay. Any more clarity on when we are going to see the AI policy being put in place?
I think they've already started. I mean, they've already started implementing the policy, right? You see new partnerships happening every day with respect to research, with respect to skilling. NASSCOM is working very closely with the government to drive the skilling agenda, the reskilling agenda.
So how much of a challenge is that going to be? I was going to ask you this question a little later on, but since you brought this up, the skilling problem or the skilling deficit, if we were to truly capitalize on this deep tech opportunity? I mean, NASSCOM has put out a number of, in excess of $900 billion is what this sector could contribute by 2030. But do we have the capabilities? Do we have the skill sets in order for us to be able to maximize on it?
That's the biggest job ahead of us. We have to build. And this is one of those cases where I don't think failure is an option. We have to come together and we have to build the capabilities or the skills to be ready to leverage the technologies that Rishad just mentioned, to find the solutions and innovate at the rate at which India needs to innovate.
So what's the plan for the skill part of this problem?
So we've launched an initiative, NASSCOM Future Skills, which is looking at the technologies, around 9 technologies, which will have the biggest impact on job creation in India. These 9 technologies create roughly around 55 to 60 new job roles. So we're working with the industry to reskill around 2 million of the IT workforce in India, which is 50% of the total strength in the next 4 to 5 years for these new job roles. So that's an ambitious goal, and the government is completely supportive and partnering in the same. And we hope very soon to also take it to universities, to colleges, so that we can start building the pipeline apart from reskilling the current workforce.
Shri, just to add to that, one of the challenges today across organizations, across building these deep tech companies is the availability of the right skills, right? So building out those skills is a core requirement for winning. And that's a big focus across industry, across companies. It's going to be a huge focus, and getting that right is a start to winning.
And what is the kind of investment that we're talking about in order for us to be able to bridge the skill deficit? I mean, you've got a target of reskilling 2 million people. What is it going to take in terms of investment? And largely it's being supported by industry. I mean, there is no government spending on it as such so far.
Think of it as an ecosystem. Today, what NASSCOM has done.
That's why I call it an investment.
We've put together a platform, right? The platform today has content, 30,000 pieces of content. It has 200,000 members who are already participating on that platform. It has 10 to 15 large companies today who are already sort of very active on that platform. But it will be a marketplace, and people who use those services and want to build those skills will pay for it. It won't be sort of one party that pays for the reskilling of the ecosystem overall. It will be people who want to participate in that. And certainly government can play a role. Government can play a role in terms of providing some level of support, perhaps some sort of a subsidy to individuals who want to reskill and upskill. But ultimately, it will be people who benefit from those services paying for those services. So I would think of it like a marketplace.
Okay.
See, the beauty of NASSCOM, and I feel very proud to say this, the one thing that we do, which very few people can do or organizations, is bring that ecosystem together, right? And bring them together in a way that they don't usually come together. So, for example, the platform has around 30 or 32 of some of the leading content providers across the world. And they've all come together to solve this problem, right? So when you have a problem that is going to impact the world, not just India, you will find that industries will come together, or companies will come together, and if they believe in that cause, and do their best to solve it. And enabling that is the magic.
And it's going to be a crucial piece in order for us to be able to achieve the kind of targets that you've set out. You know, we talked about the skilling deficit. Let's talk about funding, Rishad. And, you know, NASSCOM says that funding has grown about 70% year on year, specifically for enterprises that operate within this space. But what's the bet in terms of patient capital? Do you believe that that is going to be critical in order for us to be able to build this out?
Absolutely. And I think you have to appreciate with deep tech that the risk-reward equation is different, right? And you've got to be more patient, but the rewards can be disproportionately higher. And I think
are we talking only foreign capital? Is there interest from domestic capital as well?
I think that's changing. Look, I don't see a struggle today for good companies to be raising money. I think there's enough money for good ideas. There's enough money that understands the relevance and importance to be patient. So I'm less concerned about the fact that will capital be a constraint for these kinds of companies to build. I don't think that would be the case.
Okay, so what would you be concerned about? If capital is not a constraint, then what would the constraints be that you would be worried about?
I think skilling is an important component. I think skilling is a key piece for these companies to scale. I think market access is an important component. I think corporations, large corporations who have access to customers can provide that conduit. So I would say those two pieces. Certainly patient capital is a requirement. I'm not concerned about it.
Okay.
And market access is a place where government plays a critical role. And they have to partner with us to ensure that, because in India, government is one of the largest procurers of technology. So, and this is something we were discussing with Anna in the conference, that what role does government play to create that access for startups? And she had a brilliant answer. She said one of the focus areas for governments is to invest in areas where normal investors or industry will not invest, like agriculture, rural health, etc. These are areas where you need innovation and you need scale. So how can the government ensure that they invest in those areas to provide the access to startups?
We'll take a quick break, but we return with our conversation with Debjani Ghosh and Rishad Premji.
अरे मैडम एक भी कील नहीं
पर
ना 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 एक कील ना ना ना
प्लीज
एक कील जस्ट अ कील ना 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 ला 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 ना 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 ना।
निखिल साहब, टाल मटोल छोड़ो, टाटा कैपिटल से रिश्ता जोड़ो।
टाटा कैपिटल?
क्योंकि क्विक होम लोन्स के लिए भरोसे का एक ही नाम।
Fastest cooling at 36 meters per second. Luxurious 8 seats. Class-leading shoulder room. Smooth as a shark, silent as a shark. Marazzo.
Welcome back. You're watching the CNBC TV 18 special. NASSCOM has launched its Accelerate 10X program. We're in conversation with Rishad Premji and Debjani Ghosh. I want to talk about one of the big concerns that that India has, or the government faces as well, is that what is this going to mean in terms of redundancy? So what does it do to the current state of play when it comes to jobs, and what is it going to mean in terms of creating future jobs? And I know that NASSCOM has done studies on the fact that almost, what, about 20–25% of the current jobs will be redundant over the next few years. In fact, that might be an underestimation, the way that we're seeing technology evolve. So how is this going to change the job market and the job scenario for India?
I think every change, if you look back into history, has created opportunity in a different shape and form, right? The jobs that existed at one point in time were not relevant going forward. In fact, you know, Anna shared a story about how the public sector banks were so upset when computers first came about, because they said that jobs would go away because computers would take those jobs, right? So I am a huge believer that every change creates new opportunity. The nature of that opportunity looks different, and the capabilities and the skills required to participate in that opportunity look very different, right? So that's exactly why this major future skills initiative, which to me is the flagship, one of the flagship programs that we're driving at NASSCOM, which is how do we reskill 2 million of the 4 million people that work in the industry, because some of the skills that they perhaps have today may not be relevant in the future, but how can you reskill them to be capable of certain things that will be relevant going forward? So I'm very hopeful again that as with every change, we'll be able to shift, and we're trying to be proactive about helping people shift.
Yeah, one is the transition, Debjani, of getting 2 out of the 4 million to actually make the change to the new skill set that's required. But what happens to the 4 million and being able to increase that pipeline? And we have seen over the last few years that there has been a decoupling. So while revenue may have grown, it doesn't necessarily mean that hiring has sort of grown proportionally as well. So what should we realistically then expect? Because this is one of those sectors that has driven hiring in India and skilled hiring in India.
Yeah, well, we are definitely going to see growth in hiring. The rate of growth may be different from what we used to see earlier, and you have to keep in mind this industry is transforming. You know, it's with the technology coming in, the nature of this industry is also changing. So the rate of growth may look different from what it used to look, but we're definitely going to see hiring happening. In fact, we've just come out with some data to show the numbers that will get added over the next few years. But the kind of jobs and the kind of skills that will be needed will be very different, and we'll keep reinforcing that point because it's going to be crucial. It's going to be important for the success of this industry. The skills needed for success and for these new jobs that are getting created is going to be very different from what the skills that this industry uses today, and we have to ensure that that skill pipeline is ready. I really think that's the biggest challenge ahead of us.
The other thing, Shireen, I would add is the startups. I think will be the next wave of job creators as well, right? We always talk about the IT services, and that's the tonality of the question. But the reality is that if you ask me over the next 10 to 15 years, in terms of brand building, in terms of wealth creation, in terms of job creation, I think the startups will do for India what the IT services companies have done over the last 15 to 20 years. And efforts like the ones we're talking about with Accelerate 10X, with the broader 10,000 startup initiative, I think are key players in driving that agenda, which is both company building and as well as nation building.
When scale happens, it will automatically result in more jobs.
You know, how important is global collaboration going to be, and is that going to be something that this program will focus on? Because as we look at products that address global markets, A, market access is an issue, but B, you know, you don't really have that much lead time, so to speak. So how important is it going to be to have those global collaborations on the table?
I think you should think, Shireen, in terms of the ecosystem on a global basis. So we should not think of the ecosystem restricted to India. Absolutely, partnerships with global accelerators, global money, global capability building, all of that I think is going to be very important. Sorry?
Even academia.
Absolutely.
So what are they telling you when you talk to global tech firms today and pitch the idea of Accelerate 10X? What is the ask on their part? And especially, do you find that there continues to be a concern on the innovation front? Because if you look at, you know, specifically from a US perspective, there's always been a question mark on India's innovation quotient, or at least as far as our IP laws are concerned. Perhaps not legitimate at all. But is that something that continues to be a cause for concern?
So frankly, when we pitched the 10X Accelerate initiative to companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, there were no concerns. They got tremendously excited by the idea that this is about a focused initiative, focus on 100 of the best deep tech startups and take them to the next stage, right? So they were tremendously excited, and today when we launched the program, we actually launched it with a number of partners who had already signed up, and we're looking at contribution in 3 pillars. One is the acceleration, second is the deep tech capability development, and third is funding. And we have multiple partners signed up in each of these already.
So what kind of money are we talking about in terms of people who may have committed?
So that's the beauty of this initiative, right? It's not about the money they bring in. They already have initiatives. They already have programs. We are bringing together all these initiatives, the best of the people from these industry, to focus on this 100 startups that we curate, we put together, and ensure that these 100 get access to the best people, to the best technology, to the best training across the entire ecosystem. So it's really not about the money they put in, but it's about coming together and joining hands to say all of us are going to put our efforts to make these 100 successful.
So what's the next step from here on, as far as the 10X program is concerned?
Well, it's launched now, right? So I mean, I think beginning on this process, identifying the companies that we think have the potential to get there, bringing this ecosystem together, getting the mentors in place. Now the execution piece actually begins to be on this journey where we can get to 100 companies and getting those different pieces.
Any specific areas that you may want to focus on in terms of specific problems that these companies are hoping to address?
No, we don't want to be constraining, right? The objective is building 100 deep tech companies out of India that can solve problems across the government, from country problems that are scaled to company-specific problems, but just having the ability to build those kinds of companies in India. That's the big focus today.
Okay. We would love to see the next 100 global world-class solutions, tech solutions actually come from India in the next 5 years.
Why do you believe we haven't, I mean, you know, and you know this, you get asked this question a lot as well, and I'm sure you do, Rishad, why don't we have an Indian Facebook, and why don't we have an Indian Google, and so on and so forth. That's not the question. The question is, why do we not have companies that have been able to create world-class solutions, world-class products? There are a few, and we're hoping that, you know, given time and experience and expertise, we will see that go up significantly. But what's the biggest constraint?
Yeah, I mean, mindset. Our approach to innovation is definitely a constraint, and we've talked about this. You have to take big risks, and that's where some of the points which Rishad made about needing that patient capital, ability to take the risks, ability to fail fast, and start something new if you are failing. I think that culture is still evolving in India. And that's going to be a very critical need for success, especially when we are talking about deep tech, when we are talking about innovation at scale. I honestly believe it's about the mindset, and that mindset is changing. And with this kind of an effort where we get everyone together to focus on driving that change, I feel pretty good about you know, making it happen. So let's see.
What do you find most exciting, Rishad? You know, we've gone from a sort of largely, I would say, e-commerce driven startup ecosystem to now being much more product oriented as well, B2C businesses, B2B businesses. What do you find most interesting about the shift that we've seen in the past decade itself?
You know, both Debjani and I were on the ET Startup Jury Awards a couple of months ago, and I have to say, on that jury were a lot of people who are sort of veteran startup folks, and all of us saw companies in that list that most of us hadn't heard of before and were doing disruptively well. I mean, scaling, getting to 80, 100, 200, 500 crores. So what's most exciting is you're starting to see companies now that are breaking out from being startups per se to actually becoming mini companies, and that have the potential to become large corporations in the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm very excited about the resilience that you see within entrepreneurs, the acceptability to fail, so move on to the next thing, or, or pivot if that's required.
But
Capital being there.
What's the feedback that you get? Because, you know, I go back again to a conversation that I was having last night with Amitabh Kant and Ramesh Abhishek. And, you know, the sense I get when I talk to startups is that they're not looking necessarily for incentives or tax offs. They're looking for predictability. They're looking for an environment where, you know, it's easier for them to do business. It's not having to deal with a tax notice, which takes up all of their time and takes away management bandwidth from what they really need to do. So what's the feedback that you get on what the ecosystem is now looking for?
Right. I think certainly the ecosystem is looking for an easier, even playing field as far as regulation is concerned. But I think it's looking for lots of other things that we've talked about. It's looking for access to capital. It's looking for people who are thinking long term. It's looking for access to customers, especially on the enterprise side where there are more and more startups coming in, which is harder to access than the consumer side, but perhaps is the future. It's looking for lots of those kinds of things. And I think, you know, I don't think they're looking for hand-holding. And I don't hear too many conversations about, look, we're not succeeding because the environment doesn't exist. We're not succeeding because it's tough to succeed in business, right? And how do we enable that in certain areas is like for any other company. So, I think we should stop at some level thinking of the startups as a special needs child, because they're not.
Exactly.
In fact, we did a survey before we launched this initiative, and we were in discussion. We surveyed around 100 of our best startups to understand what do they need to get to the next stage, right? And the three big needs, 81% or so said patient capital. That's the biggest need. And they were very clear to reinforce that it's patient capital and not just funding.
What is patient today?
Long term?
No, but 5 years, 7 years, 10 years?
I don't think, Shireen, when you're talking about innovation, you should put those timelines. Because again, you sort of draw false boundaries, right? You just have to have that willingness to take that risk. And if you believe in an idea, stay with it, right? It may take less than 5 years, it may take more. But so that was the number one ask. The second ask was market access, both in India and global. And the third ask was deep tech capabilities development, right? Access to technology, training, mentorship. So those are the three big asks we're hearing again and again.
Well, as I said, I completely agree with you. So let me end then by asking you, so 2023, what is it that you hope to achieve by way of this program?
No, I think if we can create 100 companies that are world-class, both in terms of the impact that they have to their customers, the value that they create, I think we'll have done a great job.
Debjani?
Same.
Okay, well, we wish you the very best of luck, and we do hope that you can nurture those 100 companies and create many more Indian unicorns who service not just India, but the world. Appreciate you joining us here on the CNBC TV 18 special. Thanks very much
Thank you
for your
very much.
time. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this special. From all of us here for now, goodbye and many thanks for watching.